Now, I'm back in the create table syntax in the manuals. What I want to do is once again talk you through it. Create table, drill down into relational table. I'm going to drill down into relational properties. I want to look at out of line constraints and inline constraints at the same time. If you note here, there's a highlighted section here called constraints. I want to click on that. It goes to a separate page that gives me the definition for constraints. Again, we've got inline and out of line, and here it tells me I have an inline constraint. Look at the syntax here. Inline constraint, references clause. If I click on this, I find it just says references, object, which is a table name. You can use a column, you don't have to use anything else. Whereas out of line, you have to define the word foreign key. Inline constraints, you can give a constraint a name. So if I was to go and do something like this, let's say here, primary key, let's say constraint pk underscore category. Let's see what this does. And I'm going to once again drop the table. I'm going to recreate it. It does that. I'm going to go into SQL Developer because it's very visual. I'm going to refresh with the refresh button, and here it actually shows me no constraint name. Okay, so I think what I have to do is I have to refresh here. I think it will refresh the tables list, possibly. Category. It still hasn't refreshed and given me the constraint name, which is what I'm after. Let's try and, right, this object is defined here. Close this. I'm trying to click on this close button to get this table off the screen and it won't remove it. Let's try again. Let's do this. I'm going to double left click. I'm going to go back to the constraints tab. There we go. See? I've actually given the constraint a name. So when I look through my system, I see primary key category. The foreign key looks at the primary key. And the constraint name is pk category. I could obviously name the foreign key and the null if I really wanted to. So I could name them. I should name them because it makes it easier to figure out what's going on in your database when everything's got appropriate names. But at this level, it's not really. What you would actually have to do is define this as a table name to start with, and then you probably say parent ID. And you've got to be careful because sometimes the names can be too long. And I would have to go back to here again. I would have to drop the table category and right click to recreate it. And I would have to go into here, drop this. Takes a while to drop it off there, I don't know why. And probably do this, minimize here. SQL Developer can be a little funny with refreshing sometimes. And it's doing something, so I'll open that. I'll double click on this and I will check the constraints again, and it has named the foreign key constraint as well, which is interesting. Lovely stuff. So let's go back to here in the manual, and really what I've just dealt with is the constraint name. As we can see, we can define a unique constraint, which is like a primary key except that a foreign key can't reference it, and all you do is say column name unique, data type, so on and so forth. Check constraints we'll get to in a later movie. Here is the out of line version of the syntax. Again, unique on a specific column. Within the columnar structure, as in inline, you don't obviously have to define the column name because you're already attached to the column. Inline, out of line. So that's the detailed constraint definitions. The only other thing we need to look at is the constraint state.